Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really big one, something that definitely stirred things up globally and domestically. President Donald Trump's tariff policy.
That's right.
It came with some very bold promises, didn't it? About reshaping trade, bringing jobs back.
Absolutely. Big promises.
But as we'll dig into the actual results, when you look at the evidence, well, they tell a different story, often quite surprising. So our mission today is to really unpack what the data says happened.
Yeah, exactly. The administration, they stated their goals pretty clearly. They wanted to, quote, rebalance trade, protect key industries here at home, and a big one, revive U.S. manufacturing jobs.
Right.
But like you said, the interesting part is comparing those aims to what the empirical studies and the economic analysis actually found. We're going beyond the initial sound bites here.
Okay, so to get started, let's lay the groundwork. What specific tariffs are we actually talking about? What got hit, and what was the thinking behind choosing those targets?
Well, it wasn't really a single uniform policy. It was more like a patchwork, applied quite unevenly.
Okay.
You had, most famously, perhaps, the 25% tariff on steel and 10 to 25% on aluminum. Those were done under Section 232.
That's the national security justification, right?
Exactly, a tool not often used, citing national security. Then there were these really broad tariffs on a huge range of imports from China. Those were the Section 301 actions.
Aimed at unfair trade practices.
Yeah, things like IP theft, forced technology transfer, subsidies. That was the official reasoning. And later, there were threats, sometimes targeted tariffs, floated for things like cars, too.
So a few different justifications floating around.
Basically, three main ones, yeah. 1, boost U.S. manufacturing by making imports pricier. 2, punish or deter unfair practices from other countries, especially China. And 3, the national security angle, protecting materials like steel.
Got it. And when these were rolled out, what were the hoped-for benefits? What did the supporters say these tariffs would achieve, in theory?
Well, theoretically and politically, too, there are several arguments put forward. The core one was pretty simple economics, or so it seemed. Make imported goods cost more.
Ah.
So people and companies buy more American-made stuff instead. That hopefully encourages companies to maybe move production back here. Reshoring, they call it.
Shoring, right.
Another big argument was leverage. Using tariffs as a bargaining chip in trade negotiations, basically to force concessions from other countries.
A negotiating tactic.
Exactly. And then for steel and aluminum specifically, it was about protecting that industrial capacity, arguing it was vital for, national defense. Oh, and tariffs do bring in some money for the government, too, though that wasn't usually the main selling point.
Okay, so that's the theory, the vision. Protecting industries, leverage, maybe some revenue. But the million-dollar question, or maybe billion-dollar question, is always, who actually pays?
Right.
Did foreign exporters end up footing the bill, like the political rhetoric often suggested, or did the cost fall somewhere else?
This is where the empirical evidence gets really interesting and, frankly, pretty stark. It directly contradicted that other countries will pay line you often heard.
Oh, really? How so?
Multiple serious studies, I'm talking research published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, the NBER, and in top journals like the American Economic Review, looking specifically at the 2018-2019 tariffs, they found overwhelmingly that U.S. firms and down the line, U.S. consumers shouldered almost the entire cost.
Wow, almost the entire cost, not split.
Very little evidence of foreign exporters lowering their pre-tariff prices to absorb the cost. Think about it. Businesses importing goods had to pay the tariff. Maybe they absorbed it for a bit. But analysis, like from Goldman Sachs, suggested that especially as existing inventories ran out and the tariffs broadened, those costs got passed on. Prices went up for the buyers here.
So it acted much more like a tax on Americans buying imports than a tax on foreign sellers.
That's essentially the data showed, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's a huge point. If the burden fell here, what did that mean for the bigger picture? The overall economy, GDP, wages.
Yeah.
Did it have noticeable ripple effects?
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting looking at the macro level. Some detailed modeling work was done. For instance, the Penn-Wharton budget model, they're nonpartisan. They projected that if you had really sweeping tariffs, long-run GDP could actually take a hit of around 6%.
6%, that's substantial.
It is. And wages potentially down about 5% in their model. Now, to make that more real for you, the listener,
Please?
PWBM estimated that could translate to something like a $22,000 loss in lifetime income for a typical middle-income household under their scenario.
$22,000. Ouch. Why such big effects?
Well, it's because tariffs don't just raise prices on finished goods, they raise costs for businesses that use imported components
Right,
inputs.
like the steel example.
Exactly. That makes production more expensive, it can reduce trade overall, it makes the economy allocate resources less efficiently, and ultimately it can drag down productivity growth. And it wasn't just PWBM. Other groups like Oxford Economics, the Tax Foundation, they also found negative impacts on growth and jobs. So there's a convergence of evidence pointing to real macroeconomic costs.
Okay, so macro costs seem clear. But within the economy, was it felt evenly? Were there some industries that actually did benefit, even if others lost out?
Oh, absolutely. It was definitely a mixed picture at the industry level. You did see protection for the targeted sectors, U.S. steel producers, for instance. They face less competition from imports.
So they were winners, short term at
In
least.
a sense, yes. They gave some breathing room, maybe saw prices or profits rise temporarily. But and this is the crucial but, think about all the industries that use steel or aluminum.
Automakers, construction.
Right. Machinery, appliances, construction. They all faced higher costs for their essential materials. So what you often ended up with was less a net gain for the economy and more a transfer of wealth. Money moved from consumers and those downstream companies to the protected upstream producers like steel mills.
So helping one group, but potentially hurting another larger group.
That's often how these things play out, yes.
And what about the rest of the world? Did other countries just take these tariffs lying down? You mentioned leverage earlier, but did it lead to cooperation or something else?
Something else mostly, retaliation. Trading partners didn't just accept the U.S. tariffs. They
Ah,
hit back with tariffs of their own, often targeting very visible, politically sensitive U.S. exports. Agriculture was a prime example.
yeah, I remember hearing about soybeans.
Exactly. Soybeans, pork, dairy, lots of farm products. The USDA's Economic Research Service, the ERS, they estimated direct export losses for U.S. agriculture in the ballpark of 27 to 30 billion dollars just in that 2018-2019 period due to retaliation.
Wow. So tariffs meant to help manufacturing ended up hurting farming significantly because of the blowback.
Precisely. It shows how interconnected everything is and how protectionism can boomerang.
Okay, so we've got the economic costs, the industry effects, the retaliation. What about other costs? Things may be harder to put a dollar figure on, like diplomatic relations or just the hit to everyday family budgets.
Those are really important dimensions, too. On the diplomatic front, using that Section 232 national security justification, especially against allies like Canada, Mexico, the EU, Japan, that definitely strained relationships.
Right, these aren't adversaries.
Not at all. And it complicated cooperation on other issues, led to disputes at the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and even prompted lawsuits here in the U.S. challenging the president's authority on trade. Created a lot of uncertainty.
And for households, you mentioned costs get passed on.
Yeah, because tariffs are essentially taxes on imported goods. They push up prices for consumers. Think about washing machines, electronics, clothes, furniture. Lots of everyday items got more expensive.
So like a hidden sales tax, almost.
In effect, yes. Estimates varied, but analyses suggested it meant hundreds, maybe even a couple $1,000s in extra costs per household per year, depending on what they bought and the specific tariffs active at the time. That adds up.
It definitely does. So let's circle back to those original goals we talked about at the start. Did the tariffs actually succeed in, say, bringing back a wave of manufacturing jobs or in shrinking the trade deficit?
Well, on the reshoring front, the evidence is pretty weak, honestly. There just hasn't been a large-scale, durable return of manufacturing sufficient to outweigh those broader economic costs we discussed.
So no big wave of factories reopening because of tariffs.
Not really supported by the aggregate data. Some individual decisions might have been influenced, sure, but not a major trend. And as for the trade deficit, well, economists generally agree that trade deficits are driven by bigger macroeconomic forces.
Like saving and investment rates.
Exactly. National saving versus investment, capital flows. Tariffs alone don't really change those fundamentals much. So they have a very limited ability to fix a trade deficit in the long run. The overall deficit didn't significantly shrink purely because of the tariffs.
Okay, so pulling all this evidence together, how do we make sense of it? What's a fair, balanced way to assess these tariffs now, looking back?
I think the clearest takeaway is that tariffs are a very blunt tool. They can shield specific domestic companies from foreign competition in the short run. And yes, maybe they can serve as a bargaining chip, though the effectiveness there is debatable too. But the empirical work is pretty strong on this. The costs were significant, and they were largely paid by Americans, not foreigners. They hurt downstream industries, provoked costly retaliation, and created a drag on overall economic growth and wages.
So the costs seem to outweigh the benefits based on the studies?
The broad consensus from the economic research points heavily in that direction, yes. That doesn't mean tariffs are never justified. Perhaps, in very narrow cases, genuine, verifiable national security threats, or addressing specific, proven unfair trade practices through established channels, may be temporary help for industries adjusting.
But not as a broad, long-term strategy.
The evidence suggests the downsides of that approach are pretty substantial, especially regarding efficiency and who ultimately bears the cost.
So if broad tariffs aren't the magic bullet for things like reviving industry or ensuring fair trade, what are the better alternatives? What else could policymakers use?
That's the key question, right? If you want sustainable industry and a fair competition, there are other tools generally seen as more targeted and less costly overall.
Like what?
Well, things like properly enforced anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws, those are specifically designed to target unfair pricing or subsidies by foreign entities. Working with allies, building coalitions to put pressure on countries over issues like IP theft or subsidies, rather than going alone unilaterally. You can also use targeted incentives, tax breaks, regulatory adjustments to encourage domestic investment.
Supporting specific goals directly.
Exactly. And investing in workforce development, making sure people have the skills needed for modern manufacturing. Plus, negotiating clear rules-based trade agreements can provide stability. And if there is a genuine national security need,
Yes.
then very narrowly tailored measures, maybe with sunset clauses so they expire, and perhaps mechanisms to help downstream industries hurt by them, would be much less damaging than broad tariffs.
So to kind of wrap up our deep dive here, the picture that emerges is, well, complex, but the main theme seems to be unintended consequences and hidden costs.
I think that's fair.
Some industries got that temporary shield, but the ripple effects were widespread. Higher costs for families and businesses here, farmers getting hit by retaliation, and a general drag on economic growth and wages.
Yeah, I think this exploration really underscores that the costs of these kinds of broad tariff policies are very real, they're measurable, and often they fall on the very people or sectors the policies might have aimed to help, or just bystanders caught in the economic crossfire. It really forces you to ask, for any future strategy, whether it's about industry or trade, are the short-term gains for a specific group worth the longer-term costs in efficiency, growth, and potentially damaged relationships? That trade-off needs careful weighing.
It leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? Thinking about the tools governments reach for. What does this experience tell us about how carefully we need to consider the full impact, especially those hidden costs that everyday citizens end up paying when we try to shape the economy?
Subscribe for more.